Okay, we are recording.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Municipal Accountability Review Board for today, Wednesday, November 3rd. I do not have any opening remarks today. However, out of respect to my co-chair, Ms. Shaw, do you prefer to offer any opening remarks today? You're on
I
mute.
do not have any opening remarks other than good morning to all. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Excellent. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? We have a rather robust agenda. First item on the agenda today is our public comment period. If there's a member of the public that wishes to provide remarks today, please identify yourself. You'll be recognized by myself, and then you'll have the floor for 2 minutes. Is there anyone here for public comment today? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes for October 6, 2021. Is there a motion?
David Biller, motion to approve.
I second that motion.
Great, it's been properly moved.
An amendment, I think I mentioned to Julian that although I adjourned, seconded the adjournment of the meeting, I'm listed as not being there. So if it was an invalid adjournment, I guess we're still in session. We might fix that by letting people know that I was there.
Great, we'll make that correction to the record. Thank you, Bob. Julian, that's noted? Very
Yes.
good. Any other discussion or edits to the minutes? No. Okay, seeing none, Julian, over to you. For the approval of the minutes.
Okay, Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Waxenberg. I'm sorry, he is not on yet. Mr. Biller,
Yes.
Mr. Luciano. He's not on yet either. Mr. Hamilton,
I'm going to abstain. I wasn't at the meeting.
Mr. Felsigno,
Yes.
Mr. Egan,
Yes.
Mr. Brockman,
Yes.
Ms. Shaw,
Yes.
Secretary McCaw.
Yes.
And are there any other members of the board that have joined that I did not mention? Okay, that's everybody then.
Okay. First up today is the Town of Sprague. First item for the Town of Sprague is a subcommittee update. We did not have a subcommittee meeting in October. The next subcommittee meeting is scheduled for November 18th. Next up for Sprague is review and discussion of the monthly financial report for September 2021, which you have in your meeting materials. I'll turn it over to the town to provide us with an overview.
So as of September 30th, we are still year over year, just about on even from last year with expenses and revenue. There aren't any glaring things or major things for that time period, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that we do have, we had 2 roads that we had to repair after Hurricane Ida. That we're going to have to deal with where the funding is going to come from. FEMA has not yet made a decision about whether they're going to declare anything. So that's going to be about $44,000 to fix 2 roads that were washed out during the storm. If nothing else, we'll have to take the money from our budgeted surplus, but I just wanted to give you a heads up ahead of time.
Thank you very much. Any discussion or questions on Sprague's financial report for September 30th? Hearing none, thank you so much. We are going to move on to the City of West Haven, please. Confirming we have the mayor and the West Haven team with us today.
Good morning. Frank and Michael are here. The mayor, I believe, is on a call, but I'll go over and try and wrangle her for you. Oh, Michael, can you click the? Yeah, and you know what? Okay, Michael's going to go and make sure the mayor's coming in. Okay, you're just ready. Yeah.
Give her a couple minutes.
Yeah. 3 minutes. She's on her way. She's on her way.
Thank you, Frank.
Sal has joined.
Morning, Sal.
They do.
Okay, I think we're set. The mayor just came in.
Great. Well, good morning to all of you. The first item for the City of West Haven is the subcommittee update for today. I'd like to first highlight that they provide an update on the CRF audit. As reported in the last meeting, OPM has contracted with Cohn Resnick to conduct an audit of the city's use of the coronavirus relief funds. Cohn Resnick has delivered to the city its initial request for documentation and provided the city with a portal to have all documents uploaded. I want to remind West Haven that it is critically important that the city be responsive to Cohn Resnick. We need to avoid delays in providing the requested information. Cohn has had to follow up at least one time to seek documents. It is my understanding that a number of documents were uploaded to the portal as of yesterday afternoon, and Cohn is beginning to review. There is a full written subcommittee update that was provided in the meeting materials that you have before you today. In our October subcommittee, there was a discussion on a comprehensive report of the fire districts, and there was also discussion on various open items, including vacant positions and the memorandum of agreement, which we will discuss in further detail in the next agenda item. The next subcommittee is scheduled for November 16th. Ms. Kennison or Mr. Frond, is there anything else that you'd like to provide in terms of subcommittee update for West Haven?
Nothing from me, Secretary.
Thank you.
I'll-
Julian?
I'll discuss
No,
it
thank
in-
you.
Okay. You'll discuss it in the next item.
Yep.
All right. Any questions with regards to the subcommittee update for West Haven?
So, David Biller, I do have a question. I don't know that it's for the subcommittee. It's more of a question for the board. Wanted to find out, I did see that, I think somewhere over the course of the last couple of days, I saw in the news that there was a lease, the West Haven property in the shoreline was leased out to a brewery. First of all, obviously, congratulations to the city of West Haven. I think it's great to bring business in. I'm just curious for my own information, is that something that will eventually come before us? The circumstances of the lease, or no?
We'll have to follow up with the city offline. I mean, we do have a statutory requirement to review contracts that are greater than a certain value. We'll probably need a little bit more
Okay.
details on the contractual arrangement
Yeah,
here, David, to answer your question.
Yeah, and I don't really have much detail on it, other than I think I saw a blurb. I don't know if it was on the news or in the Register or somewhere about that, that the former municipal building, I think over on the shoreline, was being demolished and rebuilt. And I think that a brewery was relocating there from Woodbridge to West Haven, which I think is fantastic. I'm just curious if that obviously is something that's going to end up coming before us at some point for review and approval. I don't know.
Great. We will do some follow-up with West Haven. Mayor and Frank, you are here. You're on the line if there's anything you want to provide in terms of comment on that particular arrangement.
Mayor?
Oh, the mayor is coming now.
Okay, I was having trouble getting on Teams. What did you want, an update?
Mayor, Mr. Biller's inquiring about a lease for a brewery that has moved into the city, and an update on that particular endeavor. And was that is that reflected in a contractual agreement? Is that something that you're in the process of submitting to MARB?
Okay, we haven't gotten that far yet. They have to go before the city council to get approval on Monday night before we go forward with anything. And then the lease would be drawn up. And yes, if it's required to go under MARB, we absolutely would bring it before them. Before all of you, not.
Very good. So David, we'll do some follow-up offline with West Haven to ensure that the MARB receives a copy of the documentation and evaluate whether or not it needs to come before the MARB, and if so, it would be reflected in the next subcommittee and at the next board meeting.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mayor.
You're very welcome. Any other questions or discussions on the subcommittee update for West Haven? All right, seeing none, we will move on to the update on the fiscal 2021 memorandum of agreement. Members will recall that the city has been asked consistently at monthly subcommittee meetings about how it will comply with various requirements in the MOA. We have at least the last two financial audits that identified internal control weaknesses in a number of areas. The 2018-19 audit had approximately 15 findings. Approximately 7 of those findings were closed down, and their following year audits, fiscal 19-20, included about 7 to 8 findings. The city has repeatedly been pushed to fill key positions in the finance department. This is required by Section 12 of the Memorandum of Agreement between the Office of Policy and Management and the City of West Haven. We have consistently requested updates in each of the subcommittee meetings on the city's corrective action plan and progress on resolving the audit findings. That's required in the MOA under Sections 8 and 9. We've also addressed directly with the city training issues with the city's financial system. This is a requirement based on Section 7 of the MOA. You will recall in one of my prior reports that a letter was sent from myself to the City of West Haven on September 17th, again and again. And in the October subcommittee meeting, this was addressed, directing the city to provide a plan for closing out the remaining open memorandum of agreement items. The city did submit a collection of attachments that you have in your meeting materials today related to the MOA and various action plan items. However, none of these documents address a plan, a date when we can expect the items to be locked down, and confirmation of execution. And so I need to make it very clear today that part of the Cohn-Resnick audit, as I previously indicated, will look at the extent to which internal control weaknesses contributed to any misuse of funds, if that is the finding. Therefore, the continued lack of compliance with these items does put the MOA in jeopardy, because that is a requirement in the agreement in order for the state to provide municipal restructuring funds. To be very, very clear, internal control weaknesses opens the city up for misuse. When segregation of duties type issues are present that are linked to a lack of staffing, that can contribute to the financial operations not running smoothly. These are the types of inquiries that we have been on record inquiring about in our subcommittee meetings. So the next step for the city of West Haven, which we've consistently been requesting and is reflected in our subcommittee meetings, which are public meetings, is that the city must compile each open item into a reporting format that describes what steps they're going to take, what positions they need to hire, when they are going to commit to making those hires, and a deadline by which these items will be locked down. So that is the update with respect to the MOA and the compliance. And at this point, I will open it up for any discussion.
Madam Chair, this is
Mr.
Steve
Felsig.
Felsen. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
After following some of the issues that have been going on, and since I've been on this, to echo what you just read, spoke about, since I've been on this committee, we have been talking in West Haven about these, the lack of updates, the lack of compliance. Going forward, I would find it very, very difficult, and I think the MARB as a whole should halt any funds going to West Haven until these audits are complete and we know what the findings are. And the lack of fiscal mechanics that are lacking into town need to be shored up so that any going forward, we don't have the same issues or potential issues that we all foresee.
Thank you, Stephen.
Madam Secretary, Bob White, I saw that opinion piece in the paper suggesting a linkage between the delay by the city in implementing the findings and potential misuse of funds. And I'm pleased that Cone Resnick is going to be looking at that. I just think if Cone Resnick does find that they were related, that is very, very serious. And it undercuts a lot of progress that West Haven has made in the last couple of years. That would be a real body blow, and I'm pleased they're looking at it. And I agree with your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Madam Chair, Pat Egan, maybe this is a question for Frank, but just in kind of looking at the ongoings recently, my question is who in West Haven, besides the CFO, has authority to approve expenditures and things like that? Is there anybody? I mean, I know under the charter, those things are generally authorized by, I believe it's would be Frank and the town treasurer. Is there anybody else, regardless of whether it's, you know, COVID grant money or anything else, that's been given authority to green light these expenditures or reimbursements?
Yeah, all the department heads are responsible for reviewing any bills that are incurred by their department. So the process is currently, once an invoice is received, once a bill is received, the department head or his or her agent will sign off on payment of that invoice with the assumption by finance being that it has been reviewed and that the services or the products have been delivered. It then comes up to finance as long as there is a signature on the form. There are charge numbers on where to apply the cost, and the values match between the invoice and the approval. At that point, finance signs off on actually having AP cut the check.
Okay, so with the any remaining COVID funds, is there anybody but you, Frank, who has the authority to kind of green light what expenses were incurred? I know that, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Because I know that you have that authority, but I know Representative DeMassa was given that authority by a resolution submitted to the town council by Mayor Rossi, which they approved, I believe, unanimously.
That's correct.
On December 28th of 2020.
That is correct. So a number of the bills that were submitted by Representative DeMassa would have been under the same assumptions as any other department head or agent, that he had reviewed them and approved of them and then sent it on. So it would have been any bills that normally would not have come up through the other department heads. So if something got ordered by social services or the health department, those bills may have gone up to Representative DeMassa. He was coordinating a number of the invoices that came through for payment.
So did Representative DeMassa have the ability to sign a check?
No.
Because there's something in the paper, and I don't know how true it is, that there was a turnover of 1 day. And the one thing I've noticed by being on this commission is that in the private in the private world, you can write a check and have it delivered in 1 day. But in the public forum, And especially in cities, it takes forever to get a check through a system. So it's just interesting and to me how, and if the reporting is correct, how a check of that size was turned over in 24 hours.
And this is
So as long as-
precisely the level of detail that our Cohn-Resnick auditors are going to go in, as well as delve into when there are conflicts of interest with a signatory authority. You know, all of that will be rigorously reviewed in exhausting detail. I want to be mindful that we have a federal investigation and let that process play out. The report from Cohn-Resnick will come back to this board so that we can understand, you know, if the allegations are true, what contributing factors allowed it to happen. So I want to give the board the assurance that specifically these level of details is what the contract with Cohn is going to achieve for us.
What's the timeline on that?
This is Sal Luciano. I'd just like to echo what the chair is saying. I think there's an investigation ongoing, and I think we're going to have that information. I think speculating or asking questions here is duplicative and time-consuming.
Well, it should be time consuming. I mean, it's $600,000 and it's raising issues of financial controls that we've been raising and the audits have been raising for many years in a row.
I know.
And Dave, if I could, this is David Biller. If I could, this is David Biller. I just wanted to add a question that I think goes along with Mr. Egan. So I am, my question is, I understand there's an internal process by which an invoice or a bill is submitted. Somebody reviews it, it's okayed, it's signed off on, it goes to someone else's desk for a check to be written. Is there any tier, this is a general procedural question now, is there any tier of authority by which checks or payments over a certain amount, including to one individual organization with a total accruement of dollars, has to go to a higher level of authority for approval just simply based on the dollar amount of the check or total payments to any one person or organization? Is there any kind of an internal procedural process based on the amount of dollars?
Not that I know of.
Okay, thank you.
I have not been able to find any such procedure.
Could I jump in here? Tom Hamilton, I want to, say obviously we're all very concerned and troubled by, the reports here. I do agree with the chair that it's really premature for us to get into a detailed sort of discussion while there is an investigation and an audit. I think we do have to wait for the outcome of that audit. Certainly the MARB board should, delve into that report and the recommendations that come out of that report in detail after that report comes out. I do think the issue that was raised earlier in terms of the restructuring funds, perhaps there is some opportunity for further discussion. Personally, I agree that it would be best if the state withholds restructuring funds to balance the 2021 budget or whatever amount may have been planned pending the outcome of this investigation and the outcome of the audit. I don't know whether that's the thinking of the secretary and the others on this board, but that would be my recommendation, would be to withhold any MARB restructuring fund payments until that investigation is concluded.
Thank you, Tom. That is the thinking of the secretary, and the contractual language of the MOA supports that unless the city meets the requirements of the MOA, the compliance requirements of the MOA to my satisfaction, then the funds will not be provided. And until we can understand the outcome of this audit and the extent to which these compliance issues contributed, if that is indeed the outcome, it would be premature for any funds to be dispersed, and they will not under my authority. I believe that Ms. Shaw, you were trying to have the floor.
Mr. Hamilton captured my sentiments exactly. I think there are very distinct issues, although there could be a common root which relate to the financial controls. I would support you, Madam Secretary, in the wisdom of withholding any discretionary funds pending the results of the audit and other investigations.
Thank you, Co-Chair. All right.
And Madam Secretary, just one,
Yes.
I fully support 100% what you said in terms of withholding the funds. One thing, we have a expected timeline for when the audit is expected to be completed? Because I obviously share all the questions of this board. So just curious sort of what the timeline is, and I want to make sure that that stays on track as much as possible.
Absolutely. I give you our assurance that they're working as quickly as possible. And that's why you heard in my remarks, the city, we need the documents. And I'm sure that Frank is working very hard to get those documents provided. I suspect this is at least a 2-month process. I cannot say with certainty. They have a good amount of work to do. They're most important. We want it to be done comprehensively. And I encourage each of you, there are certain aspects of this audit that you want to make sure are accounted for. Please send them in to Julian so that we can ensure that's in the scope. Everything that has been raised today certainly is. And we'll get it completed. We'll report back to the MARB and we'll work with the City of West Haven accordingly.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary?
Yes.
So while that review is underway, that external review, I still would like to know and to see progress on the part of the city to comply with the outstanding items. So if we could hear from either Frank or the mayor about how it is they intend to address some of these longstanding issues.
So, yes, good question. So there have been issues for years around the purchasing procedures here in the city. We have contracted with an individual. She was formerly procurement officer for the city of Meriden. She has worked as a consultant.
We're having
with
just a little bit of feedback. So if you could, anyone who's not speaking, if you don't mind going on mute. Thank you so much.
Yep, she has consulted for the SCROG. So she has been hired by the city to help me redesign the purchasing process. She sat in with the Zoom meeting that I had with Tyler Technologies to walk the city through how Munis should be working as far as purchasing and accounts payables go. So she is currently in the process of working up boilerplate contracts as well as procedures around RFPs, RFQs, and bids. I have reached out to CCM to get a list of the number of procurement people in various towns in the area. I did receive from them a response on Friday, giving me a dozen towns in the area and the number of people in their procurement organization. Needless to say, they are all higher number of employees than West Haven currently has. That will be addressed in this year's budget. The contractor, as I said, is helping us to redefine the process around purchasing. I had spoken to department heads a year to a year and a half ago, instructing them that we needed to go to a more robust purchase order process and get away from the manual voucher authorizations. There was some compliance, but not a lot. So what we're going to end up doing is once we can get the procedures in place, once I can get the training down, we will issue a letter to the vendors that do business with West Haven indicating that unless there is a valid purchase order on the invoice, West Haven will not pay the bill. We would consider that to be a purchase in violation of our policy, unless it is an emergency and has been documented as such. My thinking on that is if we can't get internally the departments to comply, we will force them to comply through their vendors.
Can I just add something to that? I would just like to add another thing, and I totally agree with Frank. As everyone knows, our history when we first got in, and when I first got in 17, as I tell everybody, everything was broken, and one of the things was that purchasing existed one person that half the time was working as the purchasing agent and one half of the time with risk manager. So I am very pleased that, we want to go forward. What I would like to suggest and maybe bring it forward at the subcommittee meeting is I agree with Frank, all that he said, except I don't know if we can wait until the next budget is my concern. This is clearly an issue. I think we all know it's an issue. I think we should put together a plan and then see if we can locate the money in the budget to pay for these employees, whether we wait until after the investigations are all done. But I think it's something we should start looking at right now. I don't think we should wait until July the 1st. So that's my 2 cents on it. Frank agrees, I'm sure.
So we agree wholeheartedly. I speaking for myself, I agree wholeheartedly. There are positions in your MOA compliance documents that you've indicated for a period of time you'd be filling that have not been filled. So number one, they need to be filled. We need to know what they are. We need to know that the time frame for filling, and then if the staffing is not adequate, then the city should be identifying a funding plan to put the proper positions in place. And even if it means pulling from contingency. So your next step is to identify the resources needed so that you can begin execution immediately and bring that plan back to the subcommittee so that members can see that you're taking actions to address these issues, put the staffing in place, and then build the procedures and policies around it.
The staffing issues in the MOA, with the exception of the accounts payable analyst, have all been filled. Finance has been restructured. We have a new admin in there that's been working wonderfully. We have a floater admin that's assisting the rest of the city departments. So to mind, the only one, HR, the HR generalist is up and we'll be doing interviews. The personnel director came in on October the 18th and has been working since then. And as far as finance, the only one to my knowledge that is not been filled is the AP analyst, but it is been posted. So we are working with the two HR generalists and the accounts payable analyst.
Ms. Kennison.
Has the AP position been posted yet?
It has been posted.
Yes.
I'm waiting to hear back from personnel to find out if anyone internally has posted for it. I believe that someone did, and I believe that she is qualified and has the credentials. But I'm waiting to get a formal response from personnel. Once that happens, we can get that position filled and move forward with staffing up as we need. One of the issues that I had spoken to Wilma, who is the contractor, is asking her for her guidance and her recommendations as to the number of people and the capabilities of the purchasing department, so that I have enough background and details to be able to support this if there's any pushback.
There should not be any pushback in light of everything that has gone on, and based on the track record and the lack of internal controls, there should be no pushback whatsoever on filling the positions. You will not fix your financial infrastructure unless you have the positions. And Mayor, I advise that you push forward to get that. I'm sure the secretary will agree.
I do.
Is there any way to get a timeline on this? I mean, we've been talking about this forever, all these.
I agree, Stephen.
I mean, this is, I mean, we're going to be here for another 6 months listening, that, the process is the process. But you know what? Somebody's got to step up to the plate. Someone's got to make a decision. Someone's got to do this hiring. And you have too many, I mean, there's just too many balls in the air that are you can't catch them all at once. And this is where all these problems stem from. They stem from the basic issues that we've been talking about for the last 2 years. I mean, it's getting a little tiresome, and at least for me personally. So I really
Wholeheartedly agree,
I
Steve.
really like to have somebody tell me, give me a date. You know what? Give me a timeline. If you got to push it a day or two, either way, great, or a week. But come on, huh?
We were given a date.
Yeah. Well,
Mayor, your team is
yeah.
going to need to follow up with respect to the hiring and put a timeline together to send to the MARB so that we can see the commitment and that we can track progress against it. Mr. Luciano, were you trying to have the floor, sir?
I was. I don't mean to pile on, but this position in terms of having somebody guarding the hen house, that should have been the first person hired. It's just to Kim's point and to the chair's point, how can we have any trust at all if you're not hiring the person who's meant to be watching this?
Yeah, I have a question regarding what you raised with the position, saying there's a internal candidate who looks like
David,
they'd be
is that you?
qualified.
Is that David Biller speaking?
That's Pat.
Pat, okay,
It's
Pat.
Pat
I just
Egan.
wanted to make sure we could document who was talking. Go right ahead.
Okay. So is there a provision via collective bargaining agreements or something else that mandates you have to take an internal candidate?
I can't speak to that. I don't know the details around that, but anecdotally, I believe yes.
Well, we'd like to see that
As long as
contract,
they're qualified.
that contractual language, if you guys could ensure that gets sent over to the MARB. Pat?
Well, yeah, I mean, I scratch my head sometimes looking at sometimes folks in positions, and nobody who's on this call. But if there is not something that mandates it, I wouldn't be jumping, and I'm not taking away from whoever this internal candidate is. Maybe they're great, but I think sometimes you guys really got to look outside and look at other skill sets and talented people that may be out there before kind of jumping into an internal candidate. That's number one. Number two is the issues with purchase orders. I mean, it's been the better part of a few years that the issue of purchase orders, and I believe the purchase order ultimately gets created once you get the invoice, right, Frank?
Yeah, that's the way they're doing it now, and that's what I've tried to fix a year ago.
Yeah, so we've been probably talking about that and what a terrible practice it is for the better part of 3 years. And the other, and I'll end off with this so we can move on. But here's one thing, and I remember saying this multiple times about other issues. I just can't get my arms around the concept of when your office or the mayor's office tells department heads that you need to do it this way, and when you say, and we told them they had to do it this way, and the answer is some complied, some didn't. You know what? I just don't get how that works, because I'll tell you what, if I was the boss and you were a department head and you didn't comply, you'd be fired. And if I couldn't fire you for some strange reason, you'd be managed out. I just don't get how a directive can come from the executive branch, the top brass at the executive branch, and it is just disregarded. It really leaves me scratching my head.
Madam Secretary Bob White, a question to follow up. Frank, you've indicated that there's been pushback by department heads to this procedure. What is the reason that they give for the obstruction of something that is fundamentally proper procedure? What do they say?
I don't know that it's direct pushback. I think it's more of a lack of understanding as to why it needs to happen this way. And fundamentally what I hear is, we can't afford to wait for some things, although there's a lot of emergencies. But ultimately, the answer that I seem to get is that's the way we've always done it. And that answer is the single answer that pisses me off more than anything else. I ended up getting pushback when I started, when we lost our purchasing person. So I was helping out, we were creating vendors, and I said, I'm not going to create a vendor without a W-9 and appropriate tax information. Well, that's new. Why do we have to do that? It's policies that...
It's required by law.
It goes back decades. From what I understand, this is a problem that goes back decades. And, I'm trying to chip away at the reason that it needs to happen. We are getting more compliance. If you look at the accounts payable using purchase orders compared to vouchers, the percentages, lately versus what it was 3 years ago, it is showing improvement, but it's not showing improvement fast enough. And part of that is a lack of a proper purchasing department.
Frank,
Yeah,
Frank, what I'm hearing you say, though,
With
I would
respect to
encourage-
holding department heads accountable for the accountability to proper policies and procedures.
I'm sorry, you were stepped over on the first part of that question.
Yeah, the question on the floor is a confirmation that, that Mayor Rossi, that Frank has your commitment to hold these department heads accountable to complying with city policy. That seems to fundamentally be critical here, so that he does not have the struggle that he's currently engaging in.
No, he absolutely has my commitment. And when I know about it, I have stepped in and sent emails. I discuss it at the department head meetings. And again, if they are not complying with what needs to be done, I agree. Then we have to push back and push back hard. So if it does require, and I hate to use this word, making an example out of someone, and so be it, because we want to move West Haven in the right direction. We absolutely do. And that's what I want, and I think that's what Frank wants, and that's what the residents want. So we will...
Yeah, and it's been going on for the better part of a year and a half or so, according to Frank.
Right. Madam Secretary, I would ask that Cone Resnick take a look at, or maybe it's already been done through an audit, but a year and a half worth of pushback on that basis, despite warnings, suggests to me that there is at least a possibility that this system is being used in other untoward ways besides that which has been publicized. And I think we ought to satisfy ourselves whether that is the case. It's been long, and you understand people don't want to change, but after a year and a half on something so basic, my antenna are up.
But Mayor and Frank,
We will ensure that is addressed in the scope of services.
Thank you.
I think there are maybe two more before we move on.
I just want to
David?
say, Frank and Mayor, I think you're past the point of being reasonable. You've already been fair and reasonable since I've been on this board. Now it's to have people that are just not complying with the job requirements that you set forth, not only leads me to believe that they're unresponsive for unknown reasons, as Mr. White alluded to, but I think we're past the point of the wait and see, and we'll work it out. You guys, my personal opinion is you really need to go, especially with the payables and setting up vendors. You need to be in compliance immediately, and it's not even a question, as Ms. Kinnison just mentioned, this by state statute and law. So
Actually, it's IRS, excuse me.
IRS,
W-9.
Well, you
Yep.
need W-9s. There's not even a question whether you should be getting W-9s. And what I've heard is that we're writing checks to people without the proper documentation. That just sounds like a recipe for failure.
No,
So
Which-
I would jump in
What was
immediately.
the improper documentation? I'm not sure what that was about.
Didn't Frank mention that there were vendors being set up without W-9s and specific tax
Yes,
records? Right?
there are a number of vendors in the system right now that have no tax ID number attached to them. I can
So I don't
only
know how you're writing
assume,
them a check.
yeah, I can only assume that a W-9 was not acquired when those vendors were set up.
That's
Changed that practice back in December.
and have the
so-
department heads been complying? That's really
Yes,
the
yes, they have, because a lot of them were unhappy because the payments were delayed, but vendors were not set up without a W-9. And I think what they began to realize was most, if not all, companies have W-9s ready to go, just as the city does. As soon as someone asks for it, you print it out, sign it, and you send it. So, since December, we have not had any significant problems getting W-9s from anyone who's requesting a new vendor setup.
I see Ms. Shaw's hand is raised.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I share the exasperation expressed by members of this subcommittee. And as I understand the role of the MARB and of its subcommittees, it's not just oversight, nor is it just setting criteria for the award of restructuring grants. It is the affirmative kind of intervention that we've endeavored to do over the last year and a half. And I question, and perhaps this is more rhetorical, not for action or further discussion, although I'd be interested to hear what the sentiment is, but perhaps a more robust intervention is required. If in fact, basic standards around financial controls are not in place and haven't been in place, I mean, perhaps this needs to take on an increased level of participation by the MAR.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Yeah, I would echo Christine's remarks there. And, my recollection is that we talked about this issue with the purchase orders and telling departments that they were no longer going to get paid on these things. We were told that that was resolved. They were not getting paid a year ago. I think, Frank, that was one of the first things you said when you were coming in. And so to hear there's been all this pushback, I think we as a board should think about how we can empower and strengthen the mayor and Frank's hand in telling these departments that this is the rule. There is no allowance for pushback. These purchase orders will not get paid regardless, unless they go through the proper procedure.
Thank you, Matt. Other discussion?
Well, this is Mark. I came on a little late. I apologize. I think the forensic audit is going to give us a picture of past and the present, and in concurrence with Christine Shaw's comments, if that picture is such that there's further intervention needed by the state, a la MARB or some other procedure, in order to get this done quickly and competently and forthrightly, as well as to show the accountability and transparency that's necessary, then I think MARB needs to have that discussion after the forensic audit turns up its final results. But I do think that all parties probably should be aware that if in fact the forensic audit does show significant deficiencies where there needs to be intervention by us, that we should be prepared to do so. Because I do agree that the 3 years that I've been involved here, all the goodwill that West Haven has put forward through its elected officials and appointed officials seems to be stymied because of systemic policies and procedures that people have held closely that they just don't want to abandon. Well, be that as it may, they will be abandoned if, in fact, it is necessary for the greater good. Now, if they need to be abandoned with us intervening, so be it. If the elected officials and the appointed officials can't do it for whatever reason, then in concurrence with Ms. Shaw, I think it's necessary for us to consider intervening if it's necessary.
Thank you, Mark. Mayor and the West Haven team, I think you've heard the sentiments of the MARB very loud and clear. I want to be clear on the public record that this board has recognized progress from a financial nature that West Haven has made, and very specifically to shift itself to a financial model where starting in fiscal 22, you are not relying on municipal restructuring funds. That does not mean that the necessary work to strengthen your internal financial infrastructure must not be met. That has to accompany the financial progress in order for it to be sustainable. So thank you all today for your feedback. We will be following up through the forensic audit, and depending on the outcome of that audit, we'll have further discussion on what next steps would be required. With that, we will turn to the last item for West Haven today. It is the September 2021 monthly financial report, which is reflected in the meeting materials. And I will turn it over for Frank to give a quick overview.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you have the financial report in front of you. One thing you will notice is on the revenue page, we have reflected the additional pilot monies that were assigned to West Haven and have been received by West Haven. So that is reflected there. You'll also note that there is a negative revenue in miscellaneous parks and recreation, negative $76,000. When I dug into that, what we found was that West Haven had a policy this year whereby any resident who had paid for summer camp or summer activities was actually reimbursed for that. Those reimbursements were recorded as part of fiscal 22, when in fact the revenues were recorded as fiscal 21. I have spoken to the accounting department. An entry has been prepared, so that will be cleaned up for the October report. Other than that, revenues continue to be as projected. We are seeing some increases in the building permits, which is actually nice to see. Tax revenues are coming in, so we're not seeing any issues there. I'm starting to do a deep dive into some of the overtime expenditures. We're seeing overtime come in not quite as heavy as last year, because last year was the pandemic, but you could see that we're already at roughly 30% of the budget for the year, and we haven't even gotten into vacation and holiday seasons yet. So I'm doing a deep dive on that. Other than that, other expenses, we are starting to get some controls around. We have developed some new processes for getting the utilities paid timely. We had in the past seen several month lag in electricity bills and sanitation bills, which made forecasting extremely difficult. So we've put together some processes internally Once the new AP person is in, I can pass that off to him or her. Unfortunately, at the moment, I'm still kind of doing that along with everything else as we try to keep the wheels on the cart here. I have not changed any expenditure projections yet for the year. I would expect the October report, once I have a full 4 months, I should be able to extrapolate out where we're going based on, as I have in the past, using a 3-year timing algorithm for each department and account. I should be able to project out where we're going. So as of right now, the general fund, we're projecting to be $1.4 million surplus. And again, that is because of the additional pilot funds that came through but were not budgeted for. The sewer department is the same situation. We have revenues are coming through as expected. There are no additional pilot revenues in the sewer fund. So at this point, the projection for the year is on budget. Allentown, however, is the recipient of those additional funds. So you'll note that we are projecting at this point a $700,000 surplus based entirely on those additional revenues that came to West Haven but were not known in time for the budget process. At that point, Madam Secretary, I'll take any questions that the board may have.
Thank you, Frank. I do not have any questions, but I want to just flag the additional pilot funds received and the fact that you have a $1.4 million surplus. Clearly, there are resources available to meet any staffing needs to support the compliance issues. And Frank, as I listened to you give your report out, you've always done a great job here. I wanted to, and talk about what's on your plate. I also want to make sure that you are addressing to MARB through the mayor, whether or not you have the proper support to implement the expectations of MARB on the finance function. With that, open it up.
Secretary, it's Kim.
Yes, ma'am.
One other thing, it's not just the expectations of MARB. Frank is also going to be going through an annual audit as well as the forensic audit. And so that is adding more to his plate. And so I think that there need additional support of another finance structure person that would be somebody that Frank could then help rely on and help him resolve all of these findings so that they can get in front of this. And if they do not think that they're going to complete their audit on time at the end of this year, that he has the support he needs so he could complete the audit. The sooner they can complete their regular annual audit rather than delaying it will also be hurtful to him with a delay.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd ask that you please ensure that those needs are met and that they're sent to the MARB so we're aware of them so the city has the support necessary. Other discussion, please.
Frank, Pat Egan, regarding the overtime. So I know the issue came up a couple months ago about some overtime that was given to, department heads, whoever else, through some of the COVID money. Was that overtime in the previous fiscal year?
Yes, sir, it was.
Okay, and have those same positions, the Commissioner of Public Works and other folks who got overtime, have they incurred, how much overtime is, I guess the positions that got paid overtime last year, the ones that were the subject of a little bit of headlines in the newspaper, things like that, that were kind of the higher ups or actually exempt employees under the law. How much overtime has, say, the Commissioner of Public Works, those folks incurred this year?
They have not been paid any, as of this point, they have not been paid any additional funds in this year.
Okay. So with that, this is a little request for information. What I'd like is the positions that were paid, any department head, deputy department head, whoever got paid that overtime outside of your, cops and fire, those folks. So the Commissioner of Public Works, whoever it was, the personnel director, whoever got that as far as a more executive branch employee. What I'd like to know is over the last 5 years, what those individual positions, what their overtime earnings were, which they were compensated, which they were paid for, just as to figure out the consistency with the fiscal year 21 compensation.
Secretary, Secretary, that is also part of the statement of work with the forensic audit.
That's great, and I'm requesting it because the forensic audit, it's a public document. I want it provided. I don't need to wait for an audit to do it. So
the entire MARB will receive the backup documentation. The one distinguishing factor from what Pat is requesting is a comparison to, a few prior years to see if there was a consistent trend or did it pop due to COVID-related activity. That piece might not be covered in the forensic audit, Kim. So we'll want to make sure that we go back and we do a back 3-year look back. But duly noted, Pat, and we'll make sure that that's completed and provided to all members.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other discussion on the West Haven monthly financial report.
Madam Chair, this is Frank. Just a quick comment for the record, I guess you would say, is that I personally would welcome any assistance that the MARB can give to ensure that we're able to make the changes that are required here in the city.
Pat, can you please repeat that?
No, that was Frank.
That's Frank.
Oh, Frank, can you please repeat that?
Yes, I was just saying that I personally would appreciate any assistance that the MARB could give if I run into any sort of reluctance to make the changes needed around the financial controls.
You will have our support. I believe I can speak on behalf of this board that you will have our support.
Thank you.
Great. Seeing that there's no other discussion pertaining to the West Haven financial report, thank you for being here today, Mayor. Thank you for Frank for your responsiveness. We are going to move on to the City of Hereford, please.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, good morning. We have Mayor Bronin, and I saw Miss Leanne Rawls, as well as Ms. Hockadell here today. The first item we have for Hartford is a subcommittee update. We do have a written committee update that was provided in the meeting materials. I'm going to turn it over to Julian to walk us through the update for the Hartford subcommittee.
Very good, thank you. The subcommittee did meet on October 21st. We had essentially 2 agenda items for discussion. The first dealing with health insurance benefits for school employees, and you'll recall that the MARB has received separately 2 different analyses of the projected impact of transitioning Board of Education employees and retirees to the state partnership plan. One projection that was commissioned by a group of unions projected significant savings to the district, about $7 million a year. There was a separate analysis performed by the city and Board of Ed health insurance consultant that concluded such a transition would actually cost the district more each year. We began to gather, I should say that the district and the CFO for the Board of Ed has compiled some baseline information, including the renewal rates that the district uses for self-insurance purposes, complete census of beneficiaries, and a variety of other data so that we could begin the process of sort of teasing out where the differences in these 2 analyses lie. There's additional work to be done, and that will be an agenda item for the next subcommittee meeting as well. And then we also received the monthly review of the city's progress on implementing a host of budget mitigation measures. And that also is a recurring item on the subcommittee agenda, the next meeting of which is November 18th.
Thanks, Julian. Questions on the subcommittee report?
This is Mark. Being on the subcommittee, I just think it's important for the members of MARB to fully understand the difficulty I personally am having with the whole issue of health insurance on the board side for a variety of reasons. And just briefly to mention, the board using a different rates than, for example, they're using a fully insured equivalent rate rather than a self-insured rate for budget purposes, and doing a lot of back work after I get the information. It is clear that the employees are paying more than they should be paying if they were in the state plan. There's no doubt about that. The question is whether or not the board is spending millions more than it's budgeting, not spending, budgeting millions more than the budget should have, based on I don't want to say flawed information, but information that is just very, very questionable. For example, you have a premium cost and a plan cost. Self-insured, they're showing a premium cost, but we have yet to get all the data for the total plan cost, which then will show most likely that the rates or the costs between the state partnership and the self-insured could be the same, if not state partnership saving more. The purpose of the self-insured is for in my mind, to be very blunt, it's for the board to be able to use the health insurance fund as a slush fund. You over budget it so that you can, knowing you're going to have a surplus in that account, so that you can use it to balance some other accounts that may be in an overage. It's traditional, I don't want to say traditional, but it's a usual method that a lot of people use because of the rate structures for a self-insured account, similar to what they did in West Haven, and then we straightened that out and they went to the state plan. So as frustrating as the previous city was in one area, on the board side, this is equally frustrating because you have employees that have been without a contract for 5 years under a PPO, where that should have been changed, and it's costing the board millions of dollars over the past X amount of years because they can't negotiate their way out of a PPO to a state plan that's considerably cheaper. And they don't want to do that because giving up the self-insured plan, this is my hypothesis, gives them less of a surplus that they can use for other purposes within the budget. So it's looking at a major part of a budget that's being used, in my mind, improperly for the purposes of the of management, if you will, and other parts to solve budget problems. And it's injurious to the employee who has to pay over heightened premium costs for questionable, for possibly less coverage, and it's poor budgeting, to say the least. When you're charging, and the CFO made this point himself, that they have been budgeting a fully insured equivalent rate, when in fact they have a self-insured rate. So you're creating your budget, you've been improperly budgeting, and questionably legally, what does that mean for your employees? You're charging them for a fully insured equivalent rate when it's a self-insured rate. So I just have to share my frustration with the rest of the MARB in the hopes that we can move on this quickly, because having a contract, one of, I think, 8 contracts that has not been settled, that's 5 years old, is unheard of. Absolutely unheard of, to my knowledge, as a union representative over my 35 years, that a contract has been expired for 5 years. So it's something that needs to be addressed and addressed quickly.
And Mark, you're well aware that the analysis to evaluate the savings is underway. You raised 3 distinct questions, and so the first question is, what is the proper base to compare the existing plan that's offered to these employees to, as compared to the state partnership plan? You've raised the question pertaining to what premium is the employee cost share or employee premium share being based on. And we need to delve into whether or not the use of the fully insured is from a budgeting practice, which, you know, obviously with self-insured plans, we have peaks and we have valleys, right? Or is that also connected to the premiums that are being given to the employees? And we will expand the analysis to ensure that all 3 of those questions are addressed.
And hopefully, Madam Chair, it's also, can we really effectively compare the two? Because one, you have an allocation rate and a fully insured rate, and their allocation rate is wrong because it's for the PPO. They have a prescription provider that's CVS per the state, whereas in the HSA, it's not the same. So there's a $5 or $6 or $1,000 difference there. So the question also is, can we make an accurate comparison? But I'm sure whoever the consultant is that's going to do it will do their best in making that comparison. But I do agree with your assessment. It's just that I hope that we can do it as expeditiously as possible because there are time limits in accordance with the state to get this, from a negotiation standpoint, to get this done. So I'm hopeful that we can get to the root of this.
Okay. That's noted. We'll move as quickly as possible, but we want it to be done properly. So the team's well working on it. Any other comments or discussion?
Yeah, this is Sal Luciano. I just want to thank Mark for his study of this issue, and to say, you know, for there to be a $10 million difference, essentially, there has to be very different assumptions. And so his point about an apples to apples comparison is, I'm sure, what we're looking for from this neutral consultant that's looking at this issue.
Thank you, Sal. Any other discussion pertaining to the subcommittee update? All right, seeing none, we will move on to the monthly financial report for September 2021. I see Mayor Byrne has joined. Good morning, and is supported by his team. We'll turn it over to the city for a report out.
Good morning. Thanks, Secretary McCaw, and good morning to everybody. As usual, I'll give a brief high-level overview, and then Jen can feel free to fill in any details, and happy to dig in on anything that you like. The 2 big things of note here are the roughly $11 million favorable variance in the revenue, and that is attributable entirely to the additional pilot funding that came from the state. We've discussed this in the past. You know, what we budgeted was for half of that. We did not budget the other half. That said, we do intend to use that additional funding for capital investment. So that is not going, at the end of the day, we plan to transfer that funds to the CIP, that funding to the CIP, to enable our continued continued investment without borrowing. That we'll continue to report that as favorable variance, but I just want to make sure that everybody knows that that will not ultimately go to surplus or to fund balance. The other significant thing here on the expenditure side is in the payroll and benefits. That is entirely a function of when we take attrition savings. And so we think that will be that negative variance will be eliminated and more as we actually take attrition. We budget with expectations of a certain amount of attrition, throughout the year, but we only take it, over the course of the year. And then finally, there's some negative variance that you see in utilities, That is in part tipping fees, which have gone up. We also had some issues at some splash pads where we had large water bills that we were working to figure out that there were some I think some leaks and some other technical issues that we're working on addressing, and A, making sure that the charges are accurate, and then B, making sure that to the extent there was water loss, that we get our arms around that. Other things to note, our fire OT continues to be high. We continue to work on it, and I'd be happy to let for Jen to talk in more detail. But those are the top level changes that you see here. Jen, anything that you want to add that I didn't cover?
Good morning, members. Thanks, Mayor. The one thing I would like to point out is that our attrition rate, about 1.7 million in attrition savings for this year that we took, so that's higher this year than last year. But other than that, I covered it all, Mayor. Thank you.
Great. I'd like to open it up for questions or discussion. Mayor, I wanted to inquire about one item before the other members jump in. The corporate contribution, $10 million commitment from our corporate partners.
I apologize, Secretary. I'm having a little trouble hearing. I don't know if it's my computer or if it's across the board. Can you ask that one more time?
The corporate contribution of $10 million, just wanting to confirm that the commitment is still in place from the corporate leaders.
It is. It remains for another fiscal year beyond this. That said, it is being utilized in a slightly different way this year. So as we have talked about in prior meetings, we developed an ARP spending plan, which includes some economic development work in order to ensure that we are achieving that plan while also being compliant with all the federal requirements. There are some swapping of funds, and so the corporate contribution, which has traditionally gone to 2/3 of which has traditionally gone to library operations, will now all be going to the library to fund the construction of the 2 neighborhood library branches that were included in our ARP plan. We will backfill that spending with revenue replacement dollars from the ARP funding.
Very good. Thank you for that. And Jen, would you be able to just comment a little bit on the uptick in the OT spending?
Yeah, so related to fire, it sounds like most of the overtime is due to vacations and things being taken at the beginning of the year, but we're working really closely with the fire department to make sure that our projections and their projections are matching up, and so far they are. So we're seeing a downward trend for the rest of the year is the hope.
Thank you so much. Other questions or discussion?
Secretary McCauley, at whatever point the members' questions are exhausted, I do have one issue that I want to flag for the committee.
Sure, go right ahead, Mayor.
I just want to make everybody aware that we are seeing, we have talked in prior meetings about our police attrition as a result of police officers being recruited away to other towns where they were offered, significantly higher salaries, often for doing significantly less work. Again, no disrespect intended to suburban police officers. I just want to flag that we are seeing increased pressure from other towns in Connecticut in recruiting our employees from many departments where they are offering $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 more for the same position. It is a very serious issue. I cannot imagine that Hartford is the only city facing it, but I think it in some departments has become a very acute challenge where we are working on MOUs with unions to try to address it. But it is not a challenge that we'll be able to address across the board because we simply cannot afford that level of increase in payroll or anything close. But it is a real threat to operations, and I want to just make the MARB aware of that. Related to that, on the police side, I do want to flag some concern that as the state police have to, are required to fill their large number of vacancies, that they, may do so by looking to local police departments. And I think that would be devastating to local police departments. Again, not only Hartford, but certainly that could include Hartford. And I hope that there is a very, very, deliberate effort made at the state level to avoid that outcome. But I want to make sure that the MARB is aware of it, because this is something we're wrestling with, and it is not a problem for which there is a great solution.
Thank you, Mayor. Any questions or follow-up from any of the members?
I know that Secretary McCaw, I do know that there is a hiring issue even at the state level with trying to find qualified people. So I don't know, you saw it in police, Mayor. I'm not sure any other areas, but I do know, like in accounting and even in a contractual positions that we have at the state, that we were finding challenges to fill some of our, professional positions as well.
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
I will say we've lost a number of employees to the state. And I think it's important to stress this, because we are, when we went through our most severe fiscal crisis, the clear expectation from the state, from around the state, from legislators, was that we needed to do everything we could to control costs, which we did, and we negotiated aggressively. I think it's really important that people understand that that is very difficult to do when other towns that don't face fiscal constraints are bidding up that cost dramatically. And it is not a reasonable expectation to say that the city needs to both keep costs close to flat and compete for labor in an environment in which the state is competing with more favorable contracts.
Well,
let alone suburban towns.
Understand, and the point is well made, and obviously, as we both jointly know, that the circumstances for those very aggressive negotiations were different than what you're facing now. I would say, Mayor, that the additional pilot funds, maybe there's an opportunity for you to do some spot fixing where you find the city to be significantly uncompetitive and where there's a high level of risk.
We will try to do that. As you know, though, looking over that long-term plan, while we did not need those funds for balance in this fiscal year, we did need those funds for balance in the out years of that 5-year plan, even at very modest GWI increase assumptions.
Other discussion? This seems like an item that will be.
This is Sal Luciano.
Go ahead, Sal. You've got the floor.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I do have compassion. On the other hand, sometimes these wounds are self-inflicted. I know, for instance, when West Haven decided to get rid of the defined pension for police officers, then they became a training ground for training police, and who would then immediately leave. If you can get shot at for 20 years instead of 40 years, you're going to go to the place where you only get to get shot at for 20 years. So, the state tried to handle that by saying that if a policeman left within 2 years, they would have to pay the town that's receiving the trained policeman the cost for training the policeman. And what that did is make them wait 2 years before then they would then transfer to another city. So it is important to look at some of these issues and to say, that they get created when benefits get changed to the point where it's simply not in the person's best interest to continue working there.
Thanks, Sal. Other feedback or discussion?
Well, I just have to concur with Sal as far as, a lot of times an individual, and I'm sure everybody on MARB understands this in the positions they've been, there's a lot more to a position than just the monetary benefit of that position. It's the security and it's the long-term investment that one makes as an employee, and it's the recognition. and I'm sure that the city is trying to do the best it can. But, you know, working conditions oftentimes define a person's willingness to stay. I mean, if police and fire, from an overtime perspective, can make X amount of dollars well above their salary. But beyond that is, of course, the conditions by which they're working. Same thing in education, where we're just finding out, which is no news, that the Hartford system is losing teachers within the first 6 years at a historic rate. Well, I don't know how historic it's been, but it's much more than the money. So doing a deep dive into why are the people leaving? Is it the money? Is it the fiscal situation that one finds himself in order for them to leave, or is it other issues that management can address that may make it more appealing for a person to stay there? As Sal said, you know, you train yourself in Hartford, you're a viable product anywhere in the state. Hartford is a tremendous training ground for East Hartford and the surrounding communities. But what would cause a person to stay in Hartford is, I think, a lot more than the money. So, because that's probably why they went there to begin with. At least I found that in education. So, I know the mayor probably is and or will try to get these issues. So the question is, doing the best you can to determine what is the cause or the root of this migration, and hopefully if Marv can intervene in some way, I'm sure we'll have a discussion about it.
Thank you, Mark. Any other comments on the issue the mayor raised? All right, anything further on the monthly financial report? We do have a non-labor contract, Greenwood Emergency Vehicles LLC, and the city will provide us with an overview of the fire apparatus purchase.
Hello again. I will start it very quickly, and then Chief Barco is on the line, as is Assistant Chief Riley, to answer any questions. But at a very high level, this contract is requesting the purchase of a ladder apparatus from the Greenwood Emergency Vehicles. The cost is roughly $815,000, which reflects a $100,000 reduction in cost based on incentives from the vendor. And we are funding this using the 2021 surplus through the Vehicle Equipment and Technologies Fund. So I'm happy to answer any questions or turn it over to Chief Barco if he has anything he wants to add to that.
Chief, anything that you'd like to add?
Good morning, Madam Secretary. Yes, this is out of the 3 years I've been Assistant Chief of Operations and now the Chief. We've, under Chief Freeman, initiated a vehicle maintenance program, which we haven't had in several decades. So as you all may be familiar with, most of our apparatuses are either past their age or engine hours according to NFPA 1901. So we're requesting additional apparatus to replace our overly used and very beaten down ones that we currently have.
Thank you, Chief. Questions from the board, from members pertaining to this purchase? Okay, just a quick question for me. With respect to the purchase from Greenwood Emergency Vehicles, just would be good to know on the record if this is a contract that was competitively bid. Anything that you could describe along those lines would be helpful.
Yes, ma'am. It did go out through a competitive bid process. Looking at the needs of the department and the apparatuses presented to us, Greenwood was the best fit for the city of Hartford. Also, the first purchase of apparatus, they discounted it by approximately $100,000 for us to purchase a secondary one.
Great. Any other questions It's been competitively bid, got a good rate here, and they have adequate funding through use of surplus. There are no other questions, and that will conclude our time with the City of Hartford today. All right, I see none. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to the team, and we'll see you next month. Let's see, on other business, we do have the 2022 calendar. It's amazing that another year is upon us. Just want to note for the members, it's gone by rather quickly, I must say. The draft calendar will be distributed via email to all members. Please review it, provide any comments to the team in advance of the December meeting, and we will act to approve the calendar at the December meeting. With that, if there's no other business before the MARB, I'll have to take the motion to adjourn. And just in closing comments, I want to thank all of the members for your engagement, your continued partnership as we work with our 3 MARB municipalities. We've made some progress. There's still more work to be done, but I just want to thank you for your participation, your contribution here today. And as always, to my co-chair, Shaw, if there's anything you want to add, the floor is yours.
No, I just want to express our appreciation for asking the hard questions that we all have ruminated on. And I think today's meeting was a very productive and candid exchange, and looking forward to next steps.
Thank you so much. With that, we'll have a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
David Biller, so moved.
Excellent. In a second, please.
Second.
Thanks, Matt. All right, Julian, over to you to properly close us out. Thank you so much.
Oh.
How about we do this today? Everyone go off mute, please. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Excellent. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next month. Take care.
Very good.
Thank you, Secretary.
Right.